All right, today we're going to do something really interesting. We're going to step into the shoes of a top-tier management consultant and crack a classic business case, one pulled straight from the legendary book, Case in Point. Let's see how the pros solve these high-stakes problems. So picture this. You walk into a big, fancy conference room at Coca-Cola. The client looks you right in the eye and lays it all out. They want to boost their profits here in the US, and they've got one big idea. Just raise the price of a can of Coke. And the question they're paying you the big bucks to answer is simple. Should we do it? But then, just as you're starting to think, they add a twist, a really critical constraint. This is the piece of the puzzle that turns this from a simple math problem into a really tough strategic challenge. Whatever you recommend, they absolutely cannot lose any market share. And that one rule, well, it changes everything.
Okay, so first things first. Before we even think about a solution, we have to do what every good consultant does. Get the facts straight. We need to clearly define the client's goal and understand every single piece of data we're working with. No guessing, no assumptions, just the hard facts. So let's break down this client brief. The objective? Crystal clear. Make more money. The market we're talking about is U.S. grocery stores, which tells you we're dealing with huge volumes, but probably razor-thin margins. The action on the table is that price increase. And then, of course, there's that massive constraint looming over it all. Do not lose market share. These 4 points basically create the box that we have to think inside.
The client also hands us some key numbers. As it stands, they're selling 100 million cans a year at 23 cents a pop, and they're expecting to grow by 6%. Now, if they hike the price up to 27 cents, they think that growth is going to slow way down to just 1%. Our first job is to figure out what these numbers really mean for the bottom line.
Now, it is really tempting to just grab a calculator and start crunching these numbers, right? But that's not what top consultants do. They never just dive in. First, you create a logical structure, a roadmap that's going to take you from the problem to the solution without missing a single step. It is all about thinking before you calculate. And you know, the gold standard for building this kind of roadmap is something called the MICE principle. It stands for mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. I know, it sounds a little academic, but stick with me. The best way to think about it is like a pizza. Each slice is its own distinct piece. That's the mutually exclusive part. And all the slices together, they make up the entire pizza. That's collectively exhaustive. It's a simple idea that just makes sure you cover all your bases without repeating yourself. So here's our MICE game plan. Step 1, we're going to analyze the direct financial impact on Coke and only Coke. Step 2, we have to model what the competition, meaning Pepsi, is likely to do in response. And finally, step 3, we'll bring it all together and synthesize our findings into the final recommendation. This structure is going to keep us on track.
All right, time to execute step 1. Let's roll up our sleeves and actually run these numbers. Remember, for now, we are looking at Coke in a vacuum, just to figure out what the pure financial upside looks like.
First up, the status quo. What happens if they do nothing? Well, we take their 100 million cans, multiply that by the current price of 23 cents, and then we factor in that forecasted 6% growth. That gives us a projected annual revenue of just over $24.3 million. That's our baseline. Okay, now for the price increase scenario. Same 100 million cans to start, but this time we multiply by that higher price of 27 cents. Then we apply that much lower 1% growth factor. And the result? A projected revenue of almost $27.3 million. So the most important thing here is the difference between those two numbers. By raising the price, even with that huge slowdown in growth, Coca-Cola stands to rake in an extra $2.9 million a year. I mean, that really shows you the power of pricing, doesn't it? And to put that into perspective, that $2.9 million bump is roughly a 12% boost to revenue. So if we're only looking at Coke's own finances, this looks like an absolute home run. But of course, great strategy is never made in a vacuum. We have to consider the other 80,000-pound gorilla in the room. And that brings us to what is, for my money, the most interesting part of this whole case. We have to start thinking like the competition. See, business is like a chess match. A move by Coke is definitely going to trigger a response from Pepsi. And how well we predict that response is going to determine how good our recommendation really is. This is the moment in the interview, or in our case, the client meeting, where they lean forward and ask you this exact question. It's a classic move. They want to see if you can step outside your own perspective and think about the entire competitive landscape like a rational player. So what would you do if you were running Pepsi?
Well, based on the data we have, we can actually build a simple payoff matrix to figure that out. Pepsi really has three logical options, right? They can follow Coke and raise their price too, they can hold their price steady and try to steal some customers, or they can get really aggressive and lower their price. And when we run the numbers for each of those scenarios, one option clearly comes out on top. Raising their price to match Coke gives them the most revenue, over $22 million. So, the conclusion from our little game theory exercise is pretty clear. Assuming Pepsi is a rational company trying to maximize its own profit, which, let's face it, they are, their single best strategic move is to follow Coke's lead and raise their prices too. They end up making more money, and everybody avoids a nasty, profit-destroying price war.
Okay, we've analyzed Coke's internal numbers. We've modeled the most likely reaction from the competition. Now it is time for step 3. We bring it all together and synthesize these findings into a clear, confident, and most importantly, actionable recommendation for our client. So here's how we lay it out. First, the internal numbers show a potential $2.9 million revenue boost. Second, our competitive analysis suggests Pepsi is very likely to follow our price hike. Therefore, our core recommendation is yes, proceed with the price increase. However, and this is a really big however, we have to address that critical constraint about market share. To protect against that and to justify the higher price to consumers, this move has to be supported by a major marketing campaign. That's the key condition. So based on the data we have, the case is closed. But a truly great consultant knows the analysis never really ends with the spreadsheet. The numbers say go, but what about the things you can't quantify? The unseen risks? What if there's a huge consumer backlash? Or what if a big retailer, like Walmart, just says, no way, we're not accepting this price hike? These are the kinds of qualitative, second and third order questions that take a good analysis and make it a truly brilliant one. So what would you do next?